Their ego couldn't protect them. It convinced them that they were untouchable. It convinced them that they were always right. It convinced them that they were smarter than everybody else, better than everybody else, more valuable than everybody else. It convinced them that because life had always gone well for them up until this point, it always would. That's the dangerous thing about ego. It doesn't just distort how someone sees themselves. It distorts how they see everyone else. See, an ego-driven person doesn't walk into a room looking for connection. They walk into a room looking for comparison. Who's beneath me? Who's above me? Who's a threat? Who's useful? Who can I feel superior to? That's how ego operates. And most people don't even realize that they're living from it because pride disguises itself as confidence. But confidence doesn't have to prove anything. Confidence doesn't need an audience. Confidence doesn't need to make someone else feel small in order to feel big. Ego does. That's why some people are constantly criticizing, constantly competing, constantly trying to one-up everyone around them. Not because they're secure, but because they're terrified that someone might discover how insecure they really are. And the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. Sometimes they're just the most afraid of being overlooked. That's what ego does. It overcompensates. And when someone lives from their ego long enough, they begin believing the rules of life don't apply to them. They'll never leave. I'll always have another opportunity. I can treat people however I want. I don't have to apologize. I don't have to change. I don't have to grow. Because in their mind, they've already arrived. But life has a funny way of humbling people who believe they no longer have anything to learn. Because life doesn't care about someone's ego. Life responds to character. And character will always outlast charisma. I've watched people lose incredible relationships, not because they lacked love, but because they lacked humility. They couldn't apologize. They couldn't receive correction. They couldn't imagine that someone that they looked down on might actually be growing beyond them. So instead of listening, they defended. Instead of learning, they argued. Instead of appreciating, they assumed. And every decision they made from their ego slowly built the very outcome they thought could never happen. That's the irony. Because ego promises protection, but it usually creates destruction. Not overnight, but little by little. Decision after decision. Until one day, everything they thought was guaranteed is gone. Because here's what eventually happens. Life introduces them to situations that their ego can't solve. And that's when everything changes. Reality doesn't care how highly someone thinks of themselves. Reality doesn't care how many times they underestimated you. Reality doesn't care how many people they impressed. Reality has a way of leveling the playing field. That's why I've learned something. The people who spend the most time convincing themselves they're above everyone else are usually the most shocked when life reminds them that they're not. Because life has a funny way of exposing what pride tries to hide. See, they thought they had everything figured out. They thought they knew who you were. They thought they knew how your story would end. They thought they knew you'd always stay in the same place. That's what ego does. It convinces people that today is permanent, that they'll always have access, always have control, always have the upper hand. And because they believe that, they stopped appreciating. They stopped growing. They stopped seeing your value. And it's not because your value disappeared either, but because their ego blinded them to it. And here's something I want you to remember. People who believe that they're above the lesson usually become the lesson. And I'll say that again, just so you get it. People who believe that they're above the lesson usually become the lesson. Maybe you've seen that happen. Maybe you've watched someone look down on everybody. Eventually, they find themselves in the very situation that they mocked. Maybe you've heard someone say, that can never be me, only to watch life remind them they're just as human as everyone else. That's why I never celebrate when life humbles people. I pay attention because every situation teaches me something. Sometimes it teaches me what to do, and sometimes it teaches me what not to do. Either way, I'm learning. Because while they were busy protecting their image, you were busy becoming a better version of yourself. That's the difference. They wanted to appear important. You wanted to become stronger. They wanted to look successful. You wanted to build a life worth living. Those are two completely different goals. Eventually, the person who's focused on becoming passes the person who's focused on appearing every single time. That's why I always say I help people reinterpret their past so that they can reclaim their future. Because maybe they underestimated you. And it's not because you lacked potential, but because they lacked vision. Maybe they couldn't imagine who you were becoming because they've already decided who they thought you were. But they don't get to write your future. You do. That's one of the reasons I wrote Limitless, From Power to Purpose, because purpose requires growth. Purpose requires becoming. Purpose requires refusing to let somebody else's limited opinion become your permanent identity. So yes, their ego made them believe that they had all the answers. It made them believe they were untouchable. It made them believe they had you figured out. But what they never expected, while they were busy protecting their pride, you were busy building your future. And the real victory wasn't watching life humble them. The real victory was making sure their opinion never became your limitation. Because the people who thought they knew your future were only looking at one chapter. They could never imagine what the rest of your story would become. Peace, blessings, love, and power.